8 destroyers, 2 cruisers, 3 amphib, and 3 combat logistics force ships and an aircraft carrier in just the last 18 months. They do so to command the sea. And we've got to meet that challenge as we have in the past.
I had a question from a reporter yesterday asking me about what I thought about the Golden Fleet and the battleships and all that. And listen, it's still something that's maturing in process. But the bottom line, the investment of billions into that program on the left end still is still, whether it's in a carrier, whether it's in a destroyer, or whether it's in the new battleship, but still is still. So the procurement of all those things left of build is still important regardless. And what I know is our infrastructure here in America, which is why I have the Ships of America Act with Mr. Garamendi and members of the Senate, it's important that we invest. If we're going to be a maritime nation, it means we have to build ships, we have to train sailors, both civilian and military. How important is it, logistics, in a place like the Pacific, which is so far to get? How important are refuelers, both on the sea and in the air, to your mission?
I can talk to you in classified hearing about just how much tonnage and how many millions of pounds of jet fuel must be airborne at any given time. But it's a sine qua non, a without which not for combat success.
And regardless of the type of ships, and this applies to you too, General Brunson, you're kind of on a peninsula there in the far reaches of the world. It matters that we have tonnage in the water. Regardless of what that tonnage consists of, there is a high value just in the quality and quantity of ships that we have on the sea, whether manned or unmanned. Is that correct?
I concur.
All right. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chairman recognizes gentleman from California, Mr. Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. The 2025 National Security Strategy states, President Trump is building alliances and strengthening partnerships in the Indo-Pacific that will be the bedrock of security and prosperity long into the future. Mr. No, do you think the constant barrage of on-again, off-again tariffs coming from this administration are helping to strengthen partnerships in the Indo-Pacific? A simple yes or no.
Congressman, I can speak from personal experience. We have and continue to maintain the strongest relationships with all our allies and partners throughout the region.
Simple yes or no.
What was your question?
Do you think the constant barrage of on-again, off-again tariffs coming from this administration are helping to strengthen partnerships in the Indo-Pacific? A simple yes or no.
Congressman, I'll say from personal
It's okay. I'll move on. Over the last year or so, our soft power has diminished significantly. And a big part of that is due to the gutting of USAID under DOGE. While Congress worked to restore some of this funding, most programs did not come back to previous levels. This includes programs in several Southeast Asian countries. Mr. No, one more time, was there ever any concern that cutting foreign aid to key countries in the Indo-Pacific would help position China as a viable alternative to the United States?
Congressman, State Department is in the lead on issues of foreign aid, so I would refer your question to the State Department.
Thank you. We have a massive foreign military sales FMS issue, which is being worsened by the war of choice in Iran. One stark example are the 66 F-16s Taiwan purchased back in 2019. Delivery was supposed to begin in 2023, but just recently the first 2 aircraft were formally accepted. But these are not in Taiwan and not available to be used in conflict yet. Admiral Paparo, how important is it that capabilities purchased through FMS be delivered on schedule? And do you think Taiwan would benefit by having these F-16s now?
Congressman, there are problems in our FMS programs. I think the department is working really hard on fixing some of those problems. I think the State Department's working really hard on fixing those State Departments. Integrated air and missile defense is going to be absolutely critical. That is across all domains and that includes, and it's also across all zones of conflict. And so I think it's important that every FMS delivery is delivered not just on time, but early.
Thank you. Admiral Paparo, in your testimony before this committee last year, you underscored the rapid advancement of China's military capabilities, including its growing investments in space and counter-space systems. I understand that the commercial remote sensing industry has played a critical role in supporting the COCOMs to ensure that our warfighters have access to persistent, real-time, actionable data. However, the department's budget once again does not reflect that important partnership. Can you discuss the importance of continued investments in commercial solutions to meet operational requirements? And how could expanded access improve domain awareness in your AOR?
Thank you, Congressman. The persistent commercial capability so greatly augments our unique and exquisite on-orbit capability. And the mass data analytics of multiple inputs provides a precision all its own. I think it adds resiliency, it adds to the constancy of the picture, getting us closer to a stare than a blink. And we're working with a number of commercial companies in order to bring those on board, and we continue to advocate for those investments.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Bacon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, gentlemen. We appreciate you. I have 4 questions. I'm going to try to get right to the point. Admiral Paparo, the Air Force is increasing its requirement for B-21s from 100, and now we're looking at about 140 or 145. How good a news is that for you for your war plans and deterrence?
Congressman, that's very good news, and I welcome even better news if we're able to do it.
Okay, that's good. I like that. Secondly, I flew in the Compass Call aircraft for 11 years, the EC-130s. It's transitioning to the EA-37s. When I came in 10 years ago, we had 6. It's the program of record. And through digging up under couch cushions and scraping and tugging and pulling, and with the support of the chairman, we got it to 12. And I think we got 3 more in the upcoming budget. Now, I understand the requirement from PACOM is 22. So can you talk about the importance of the EA-37? Because I'm blessed to have a good committee that supports this, but I'd like to know how important it is to you.
Congressman, there's dozens of systems that contribute to our counter C5 ISR&T, military speak for counterintelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and targeting. EA-37 Compass Call is a critical linchpin in that through all zones of conflict, through the gray zone into high-end conflict. So we're strongly supportive of that capability, as well as all of the other capabilities on orbit, on the surface, and in the air that contribute to our ability to execute the counter C5 ISR&T mission and build out our intel pictures.
Mr. Chairman, we're getting us to 15 on this budget. We're getting close to the PACOM requirement, and I'm excited about that. Joe Brunson, we're listening to news about some of the air defenses being moved out of Korea to the Middle East. Can you talk, is this impacting you, or are you feel adequately covered right now?
No impacts to our ongoing missions and operations, Congressman.
Admiral Paparo, how far behind are we with military sales to Taiwan? Because I'm concerned about deterrence. We don't want a war, but if they have adequate sea mines, anti-shipping missiles, air and missile defense, China's less likely to attack, so this is so important for deterrence.
Sir, if I may, I'll talk to you in closed session on that.
Okay. One last question. I'll get a 5th one in, because you guys they're concise today. How are we doing with building rapport and relationship with India, the largest democracy on this planet?
Well, I was there last month, visited Chandigarh in Punjab state. I was in Delhi and in Bangalore as well. And it is a really key emphasis. The mill-to-mill relationship particularly is on an upward trajectory. The mean of the relationship between the United States is on an upward trajectory. It is one of my most visited partners. It is one of my most communicated with mill-to-mill partners in General Neil Chauhan, and it is absolutely a priority.
Yeah, this is a game-changing trend that we can build on. Okay, one more question, something I asked your predecessor 4 or 5 years ago. If you go to Europe, it's a lot of multilateral relationships, NATO. But if you go to the Pacific theater, it's a lot of bilateral relationships with Hawaii, sort of in the middle of the hub. would we be better served if we tried to foster more multilateral, where Japan's got relationships with Australia, and you got, would it be stronger, or is that we're just too early for that yet?
Well, Congressman, I think we're in the middle of this now in our Quad relationship. That's U.S., Japan, India, Australia. In our Defense Cooperation Council between Australia, Republic of the Philippines, Japan, United States. In the Korea, Japan, U.S. Trilat. In the United States as a comprehensive strategic partner to ASEAN and a member of the 80mm Plus. All over we see these multilaterals are getting richer. They're getting bigger all of the time. It's happening organically, and it's really exciting.
Thank you. Again, I thank all three of you for your leadership. And Mr. Chairman, I'll give you back 40 seconds.
You're awesome. All right, just for situational awareness, we've been called for votes, so we're going to get Mr. Keating in, and after that, we will recess until after votes. But with that, the gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to deal with China's engagement with Russia in terms of its strengthening Moscow's ability to sustain itself in the war in Ukraine. It's obvious that their imports of Russian oil and natural gas is helping in terms of revenue with Russia, so they can sustain the effort. And also, their exports of dual-use goods and technology that really help them sustain the defense production as well. Do you want to comment on China's activity with Russia?
Congressman, on top of being the key critical market for their energy, China provides 90% of the semiconductors that power Russia's war machine and 70% of the machine tools that powers Russia's war machine. That connection is real. It's right before our very eyes, and it's deeply concerning.
Yeah. There's been many retired military and pundits, if you will, talking about the fact that our strategic goal in the Indo-Pacific, and particularly with China, is deterrence. And the U.S. actions, their comments, as well as mine, are the deterrence factors weakened by the U.S. lack of commitment to Ukraine, particularly its actions with NATO. Just calling NATO, freeloaders, calling NATO pathetic, calling them recently paper tigers, saying their troops were in the back of the line for our confrontation, even though they were there under Article 5, the only time it was initiated. When you're looking at that effect of Ukraine with China and the U.S. Actions around Ukraine, doesn't that weaken our deterrence? As China's looking at it with Taiwan in particular, that's just not my feeling. I think it's a majority of people that, more people that are retired from the military than current military in that regard. So I don't want to get you into policy before you had to, but it seems to me that's clear. Perhaps you could answer it, Mr. No. Let's leave the military out of that policy issue for now.
Congressman, I think the relationships we're building with our allies and partners speak for themselves. I think our activities, our posture, what Indo-PACOM is doing with its OAIs, I think they speak for themselves. So no, I don't think there's been any kind of erosion of deterrence in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, you must admit, you're saying speak for themselves. That's just a free sampling of what I've had about what the Secretary of Defense or the President has said about our NATO allies. I think they speak for themselves. So isn't that something, that kind of fractured relationship, doesn't that hurt us with our deterrent posture in the Indo-Pacific and China? You don't think so?
Congressman, we're doing everything we can in close coordination with Indo-PACOM and USFK, with Admiral Paparo and General Brunson to make sure.
I'm not concerned about the military cooperation, sir. I'm concerned about the Commander-in-Chief and the Secretary and their comments as it affects that deterrent effect.
Sir, the department will always make sure we're ready to respond to any kind of contingency and that we're able to deter any threat in the Indo-Pacific.
So I'll give you one more chance. So the actions we've taken in Ukraine, pulling back, and the language and the fracturing of our NATO alliance, I didn't even mention trying to invade a NATO country like Denmark through Greenland. But that affects the deterrent posture of the U.S. when they see that fracturing, because one of our greatest strengths has been the coalition we've had, the global coalition, particularly with NATO. So how does that not hurt the deterrent effect that the U.S. poses on China when that's weakened by the statements of our top people,
Sir,
including the President and the Secretary of Defense?
Sir, our deterrence posture in the Indo-Pacific is strong, and we'll make sure it stays that way.
You repeated yourself. I just think that that's something that has really hurt us. Hurt us globally, but particularly hurt us in the Indo-Pacific. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. We will now recess until approximately 11:55 to 12. And thank you. You got a break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel here today. I appreciate all our interest in Indo-PACOM, especially with my home on Guam. I also want to thank my good colleague, Joe Wilson, who has been a strong advocate for the islands as well. Admiral Paparo, I appreciate all your support for Guam, and I know you have the nation's best interests in hand when for our defense, being the most Western soil that we have. One of my biggest longstanding requests for Indo-PACOM has been expanding our investments in Guam's power grid, which is largely still owned by the War Department. And I've been advocated for the use of authorities under 10 U.S.C. 2815 to underground more of our power lines to ensure the grid can meet Department of War's growing demands for electricity. So what do you view as the best path for DOW to support Guam Power Authority in expanding infrastructure and meeting military requirements?
Congressman, good afternoon. Thank you. You're well aware of how important shore power is to Naval Base Guam, and that is to get high fidelity, reliable power, shore power to the submarine squadron that's there. And the overall resilience of Guam, which is so important to our nation's defense, is so important to us at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command. And on all the things that we're cooperating on the hospitals, on the building out of critical infrastructure, there are direct defense benefits to that. And so not just for the reliable shore power that provides power to Naval Base, but to the entire island. You can count on my complete support for that infrastructure, also the critical infrastructure that supports Guam defense system, which is also so very critical.
I thank you for that. And as we experienced in this last storm, the utilities and bringing them back up, and those winds weren't as bad, but the storm just stayed for 3 days, and the high surf and all made a big difference. So working with Department of War, helping with our finance to complete the power requirements that we need will be excellent. I thank you for your support on that. In addition, let's talk about our civilian employees, that are Department of Defense employees, their living quarter allowance. As we know, we have high expenses on Guam, and the employees hired off island do have LQA. The employees hired from Guam do not, and end up going to the mainland to get that additional funding. So we did include the LQA in the recent NDAA. I'm just wondering when would this be implemented?
I'll have to get back with you on when it's implemented, but I do want to express my support for it. Guam is one of those locations where cost of living, including cost of housing, is so expensive. We're trying to relieve some of that cost of housing with our own construction of on-base housing facilities to take the pressure off. But for our civilian employees, ensuring that their compensation meets their living expenses so we can continue to attract and sustain the best civilian workforce is essential. And I'll work with you on that, and I'll get back to you on the time frame.
I thank you, sir. And lastly, you mentioned our medical facilities. We just don't have enough. If conflict does happen, we don't have enough at all. And if conflict doesn't happen, with all the troops coming on in, our pediatric ward is not capable, right? We're hoping people will have a good time and wanting to start their families on Guam. That would be terrific. So we need that support, especially with our hospitals. Our Navy hospital is way too small. It wasn't meant to be built for that. And our civilians hospitals don't have the capacity. So if you can ensure that we can, with GPA, also our hospital gets assistance, please.
That I will, sir, and Governor Liu, my dear friend, and I are in lockstep on the civilian hospital in Guam, as well as to continue the personnel enhancements to Naval Hospital Guam. And I'll also add the enhancements that we've made for medical at Camp Blaz as well. But all of it's critical for our defense. Thank you.
Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize Jim from Colorado. Mr. Crow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my 5 minutes to the gentleman from California, Congressman Tran.
Thank you so much to my friend and colleague, Representative Crow, for yielding. Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Smith, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here today. Next Thursday, April 30th, marks the 51st anniversary of Black April and the fall of Saigon. As the son of Vietnamese refugees, I know how imperative it is to recognize this solemn day. That history is a prime example of why this committee and this Congress should be focused on the Indo-Pacific. I also represent Joint Forces Training Base in Los Alamitos, a mission-critical base for the Pacific. So I think it's fair to say that my community and I understand better than most that deterring the Chinese Communist Party's aggression, expansion, and influence has to be the #1 priority of the Department of Defense, which is why it is also concerning that there are reports stating that resources from the Indo-Pacific are being transferred to the Middle East to support the administration's war of choice in Iran, a war that's claimed the lives of 13 service members. General Brunson, is it true that resources from the U.S. Forces Korea have been redirected to the Middle East?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I would prefer to answer that question in closed.
I appreciate that, and I will follow up in closed session. In the event with our resources being sent to the Middle East, Admiral Paparo, how has the movement of resources put our soldiers and interests in the Indo-Pacific at risk?
Along with my good friend General Brunson, I'd like to talk about that in closed session. We do have forces that are operating in the Middle East, and we do expect the return of those resources. We've taken entrepreneurial approaches to maintain our program of exercises. We do maintain a combat-ready reserve. The military is always in the action of controlling for risk, and we can get deeper into the individual movements when we are in closed session. But I'll also say that those forces in the Indo-Pacific are experiencing combat, and there's no substitute for combat, and there will be direct applicability to the Indo-Pacific.
I appreciate that, Admiral. And our military has been asked to do a lot this year with multiple conflicts and operations across the world. If this keeps up for too long, such a high demand could actually undermine our military readiness rather than improve it. We're already seeing the USS Ford on track to break the longest deployment for an aircraft carrier since the Vietnam War. Admiral Paparo, from your perspective, are we approaching a point where the demand on our troop is degrading our readiness?
Congressman, there are finite limits to the employment of the gear where it's got to go back for maintenance availabilities. I've not yet seen where depot-level maintenance has been affected for our aircraft or ship availability has been affected for our ships. I've not seen that, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. It is something that we keep an eye on, and then I've got a strong dialogue with the department on ensuring that the department is aware of what the risks are. At this time, there's not been a degradation of readiness at this time.
Appreciate that. And General Brunson, what are your thoughts on the forces within the Korean Peninsula?
Congressman, thank you for the question, and this I can't answer right now. And I would tell you that what we have in a model ally in Korea is simply this. About 20% of the cost of stationing forces forward is borne by the Koreans. And that through the Special Measures Agreement, which takes into account about $500 million in terms of what would be MILCON that the Department of War would have to bear, which they don't have to bear because that's paid for by the Korean, the ROC-funded construction. We also get about an 85% blessing in terms of salaries, which for our KGS wage employees that support our command in theater. That's borne by the Koreans. So 85% of the salaries paid by the Republic of Korea, we only bear the cost of 15%. And so the Special Measures Agreement lowers the cost to include logistics sharing, which supports and sustains our commands across, from construction materials to energy and the like. So the forces that are stationed are well positioned at less cost than others who are placed forward at OCONUS.
I thank you three very much for being here, and I ran out of time. So, Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to our witnesses and to all of our military and veterans here. We really appreciate what you're doing to keep our country safe. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to thank our witnesses and everybody for your service, and thank you for being here. Admiral, you talked about using AI to make decisions, and without getting into anything classified, what are some of the examples of things that you would use AI to make decisions for?
So at the tactical level, the application of AI for swarming drones, the ability to optimize a force against another force at the tactical level is an AI force in employment, down to make fewer weapons at mass be more effective against more targets. At the operational level, as you're linking joint function, command and control, intelligence, information, movement maneuver, fires, sustainment, protection, and security, the ability to link those so that you are optimizing the force, so that a fires decision also leads to the right kind of sustainment decision for reload, and making those processes that can sometimes be in a stovepipe as accurate as possible is also one of the ways in which we're employing AI. And then at the strategic level, to understand, given the sensitive intelligence, the behavior on the battlefield, to better understand the adversary's strategy, what their next moves are, the second, the third, and the fourth move. So at all three levels, tactical, operational, and strategic, the employment of small AI and machine learning models at the tactical level, LLMs and agentic models, so that every decision is AI enhanced, so that machines are making the kind of mathematical decisions that machines can make, and humans are making the kind of decisions that we must.
Maybe more accurate.
Yes.
Mr. No, we've heard significant autonomous and unmanned systems requirements for the Indo-Pacific theater. What is your mechanism for ensuring that DoW acquisition and policy strategies are actually aligned with those operational needs?
Congressman, as you know, reforming our acquisition system is a priority for Secretary Hegseth. This is an issue that policy works closely with our colleagues at Acquisition and Sustainment, and we'll continue to do so to make sure we have the best acquisition system possible.
Admiral, there are significant unmanned surface vessels in the President's budget for next year. You've been a proponent of USVs for a while. Have you developed a concept of operations for use of those USVs and how you will integrate them into manned fleet operations?
We have, sir, and I'd like to give you more detail in a closed session.
Sounds good. And then, Admiral Papiro, during your appearance last year, we talked about how small modular reactors might transform the ability to deliver energy to our forces and across your AOR. How would you leverage a Project Pele scale deployable reactor in the first and second islands chains?
Sir, this availability of power would potentially supersede our need for fuel. And so having small modular reactors that can deliver reliable power in a distributed fashion, I think is just going to make us more resilient from a sustainment standpoint, It's going to drive down our costs. It's going to drive down our fuel costs, and then the cost of what it takes to gain the battle space to move that fuel. And so, I'm strongly supportive of these measures.
As a Navy SEAL veteran, I understand how effective a small, agile unit can be. Do you have what you need in Indo-PACOM? And if not, what can we do to help you?
Well, I think I'll say this, is that I'm never satisfied with what we have, because the bill at the end is the loss of people, capability, money, and time and conflict. But I will say that our 1313, or rather 1251 this year report, shows no unfunded requirements given the budget submission this year.
And Admiral, could you describe how you view advanced and additive manufacturing being utilized through the PIR?
Yeah, Piper is a really important initiative for us to gain this resilience. And additive manufacturing, this is advanced manufacturing, better metallurgy, faster, on demand, and local. And so this is the future, is AI-enabled advanced additive manufacturing. There are numerous companies in the United States that are mastering this right now and getting the technical community to approve of the methods and to approve in advance these advanced parts forward is going to be critical for this.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Moulton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To all of you sitting up there, when you signed up to serve, many of you a long time ago, I imagine your vision of service was not this, sitting in a hearing room. It's nonetheless important, so thank you for doing this work. Dr. No, President Trump has talked a lot about his burgeoning relationship with China. Do you think that President Biden or President Trump is stronger on China?
Congressman, I think President Trump's record on China speaks for itself. If you look at what the Department of War has been doing for the past year plus, in terms of our posture, in terms of being ready to deter any adversary, and if necessary, responding to any crisis or contingency, I think the record speaks for itself.
So do you think it was a good idea for him to give in to China and sell them all the AI chips that not only the Biden administration, but the first Trump administration had prevented them from buying?
Sir, on the issue of chips, the Department of Commerce is in lead on that issue. And
I'm just asking you, do you have an opinion?
I would refer your questions regarding chips to the Commerce Department.
I can ask the Commerce Department. I'm asking your opinion. You are supposedly in charge of deterrence here. Do you think that was helpful for deterrence?
Congressman, we're doing everything we can to make sure our deterrence posture...
Really? Because I think if you were stopping the chip sales, that would help. And I know there's a lot of bipartisan agreement on that. What about the fact that China is holding rare earth minerals over our head? They weren't doing that in the Biden administration. Do you think that's a helpful development?
Congressman, we have very important discussions with our allies and partners on the issue of critical minerals and rare earths. I do think it's in our interest to have more secure supply chains for critical minerals and rare earths.
Well, I would agree. I think China's put us in a bind here. What do you think about the fact that people refer to President Trump as the taco president because of the way he gave in on tariffs? He put huge tariffs on China, and then when he felt some pain at home, he gave in. Do you think that helps deterrence?
Congressman, I'll repeat what I said earlier, which is the Department of War is doing everything it can to make sure our deterrence posture is in the strongest place possible.
So if you're doing everything you can, do you think that the national security strategy, the national defense strategy, do you think they do a sufficient job of deterring China from a military confrontation with Taiwan when conspicuously and clearly intentionally they entirely omit any mention of Taiwan in the document, which is certainly not the case in the Biden administration?
Sir, I will point out the arms sale that was announced a few months ago under this administration of $11 billion was the largest in history.
You're right, it was announced. But what confidence can you give us that the president won't chicken out on that as well? Because it seems like every step of the way, he announces something that might go against China or deter China or put pressure on China, and then he always chickens out and gives in to China.
Sir, I think the $11 billion in arms sales speaks for itself.
No, it has not been sold. It's been proposed. What confidence do you have that that deal will actually go through? What confidence can you give us?
So you're right. Taiwan also needs to do its part. The Taiwan LY is currently going through a process of passing what could potentially be a historic special defense
Why is the
budget.
president so non-committal when it comes to defending Taiwan? He said, I don't want to be put in that position, whereas President Biden was pretty explicit that we will defend Taiwan. That's probably the strongest way you can deter China from attacking Taiwan.
Sir, I think strategic ambiguity is a policy that has worked for decades. It preserves the president's decision space. I don't know how helpful it is to publicly state our intentions of what would happen in the event of a Chinese invasion. Again, strategic ambiguity has worked, and I fully support it.
Admiral Paparo, how long will it take to regain the force posture that we enjoyed in your Indo-Pacific AOR prior to February 28th, 2026, when we had to divert a lot of munitions to Iran?
So I'll answer that question in closed session, but I'm really supportive of supercharging the defense industrial base, and I'm also very supportive of non-traditional weapon sets that will continue to augment and affect the changing character of warfare.
I am too. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gooden.
Admiral Paparo, yesterday you testified that Bitcoin held potential as a tool for national security. Recent research from the Bitcoin Policy Institute estimates China has approximately 194,000 Bitcoins, while the United States has approximately 328,000 Bitcoins. In this era of digital competition, would it be to our strategic advantage to maintain a lead in this regard as we do with other strategic resources like gold and oil?
Sir, our interest in Bitcoin is as a tool of cryptography, a blockchain, and reusable proof of work as an additional tool to secure networks and to project power. And so I think this protocol is here to stay. I think the computer science of it has direct implications for the projection of power, not financial, but from a computer science standpoint, from the securing of networks. And so I am supportive of those applications. All instruments of national power are important, but from the military application standpoint, my interest in Bitcoin is as a computer science tool as projection of power.
I appreciate that. I agree with you. And I'd also like to hear your thoughts on monetary competition over the coming decades. What role does Bitcoin play in spreading digital property rights?
Well, people use Bitcoin today, right now, to protect their own intellectual property. And that's the reusable proof of work protocol that's combined with blockchain for accountability and cryptography for security. And so that's the role that I see for it. I see direct national security implications, and then I'm supportive for anything that maintains our own dollar dominance worldwide.
I appreciate that. Do you think we're adequately prepared to counter China's strategic direction regarding digital assets?
I think that our recent act with the Genius Act is a great step forward that moves us in that direction.
And lastly, I'll ask you, as we continue to craft the NDAA, what authorities and resources does Indo-PACOM need to address as respects the national security dimensions of digital assets?
Presently, we're in experimentation, so I'll give you a deeper look into that. Presently, we have a node on the Bitcoin network right now. We're not mining Bitcoin. We're using it to monitor, and we're doing a number of operational tests to secure and protect networks using the Bitcoin protocol.
I appreciate that, Admiral. Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, I recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Jacobs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Paparo, General Brunson, nice to see you both again. I first want to ask about civilian harm mitigation efforts. Over the past year, Secretary Hegseth has made significant cuts to personnel and institutional roles responsible for civilian harm mitigation and response, saying there will be, quote, no stupid rules of engagement, end quote. Mr. No, how many Indo-PACOM personnel are currently assigned full-time to civilian harm mitigation issues, and what are their specific roles and responsibilities within the command?
Congresswoman, I'll have to take that answer back.
Okay, I'll look forward to getting an answer from you. Admiral Paparo, from a commander's perspective, what operational and institutional risks does the loss of dedicated civilian harm expertise create for Indo-PACOM's overall preparedness? And specifically, how does that risk calculus change when you factor in the prospect of large-scale, high-tempo conflict in the Indo-Pacific region?
Congresswoman, I'll say that following the laws of armed conflict, which are ancient to a great extent and eternal, and also guarantees that our would-be adversaries also follow the laws of armed conflict, is a matter of first principles for everyone in uniform, including the civilians that work. I think the mitigation of civilian harm in conflict is a matter of first duty for everyone who works in the DoD, and we're always going to work really hard to ensure that our actions are right, just, proportional, all in accordance with the laws of armed conflict.
Yes, well, and I very much appreciate that, and I know that our folks in uniform take this very seriously. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, in the absence of a sort of standing institutionalized civilian harm capacity at the command, could you maybe walk me through, like, how would Indo-PACOM manage civilian harm mitigation assessment and response? Who would be responsible, and what gaps would immediately become apparent if conflict were to begin in the Indo-Pacific tomorrow?
I'll say commanders are always accountable. Commanders have the accountability, the responsibility, and the authority, and I am accountable to the country, to the committee, for all civilian harm mitigation, for executing our combat operations within the laws of armed conflict. We use all of our targeting capability with our collateral damage estimates. We do so within our planning processes, and then with our staff judge advocate force, which includes civilian and military. This is always front of mind.
Yeah. Okay, I appreciate that. If you need anything from us to make sure that you have the actual capacity you need to do this, please let us know, because this is a priority for the committee and has been in a bipartisan way.
Thank you, Congressman.
Yep. I actually want to follow up on something you said to my colleague, Mr. McGuire, and some of the things you said in SASC yesterday around sort of the use of AI and especially this kind of idea of the tactical swarming and cheap expendable munitions deployed in mass with AI tools. I want to ask in particular how that would work in the Taiwan Strait, for instance. So it's one of the most heavily trafficked civilian maritime corridors, commercial shipping, fishing fleets, et cetera, et cetera. And a strategy of mass AI-enabled low-cost autonomous kill capability deployed across that space, probably in the opening hours of a contingency likely. In your planning, how would you distinguish a PLA Navy amphibious assault vessel from a Taiwanese civilian fishing vessel or a commercial container ship in the AI-enabled targeting system that would command this?
The first, and I think this is, kind of the rules of unmanned and the rules of drone warfare, is that you strive generally to not send a human being to do a dangerous thing that a machine can do.
Absolutely.
And number two, you never lose human accountability for taking lives in offensive operations or defensive operations. And I'm accountable. I'm the commander, and I'm accountable for that. So having human oversight over this operation, it's not necessarily a person in the loop, but is a person on the loop that can stop something. The assurance of packages before they go forward, maritime domain awareness, so that you do know, setting conditions ahead of the conflict with notices to mariners. These are all the wide range of measures that we take place to ensure that our actions are completely in accordance with the laws of armed conflict and wise strategically.
Well, thank you. Thank you both for your service. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Latrell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral General, Mr. Secretary, thank you all and everyone else in the room warning you. Thank you for your service. I mean that wholeheartedly.
Too.
The ultimate sacrifices that you and your family go through every single day. So God bless each and every one of you. Off-grid power generation, Admiral. Can we do a little bit deeper dive as far as we can go inside this current setting? I just want to make sure that in the NDAA or anything that's coming after that you are very well funded and that we're pushing the envelope hard enough for any kind of contingency that may populate in this AOR.
Yes, sir. This off-grid power generation, this is the deployable generators, all the things that deliver power so that we can execute all the joint functions. Critically important, a part of our sustainment. We've got to be thinking about all classes of supply, and energy supply is critically important within that. And I think that this is inherent within our plans. And so,
are we prepared to move in a shorter period of time? And are you in your? I'm not going to ask if you have a warm and fuzzy. That would be weird. But are you inside your comfort zone of what currently exists? And I would guess, is the department moving?
I think first is that I'm not going to put a troop in harm's way without all the things that they need to be able to live and succeed and survive and sustain. And so I'm very comfortable that within our plans, our forces are well planned across all categories of supply, and we've got that ability to sustain. It's the resilience of it that I worry about, and I think we have to be restless and always working towards good solutions.
You mentioned I think you said low-cost hypersonic capabilities.
Yes, sir.
And doing my homework, and one of your major concerns is hypersonics.
That's right.
Are we in the right setting for? I want to ask you this question again in the next in the classified setting, but one of my major concerns is our capability in the hypersonic space and speed ratios. But
we're working with a number of innovative companies that have the capability to provide low-cost, seeker-enabled hypersonic weapons at a fraction of the cost of some of the programs of record. And we've got to take risk on this. We got to take risk in putting them on contracts so that they can scale. We have to take risk in this in giving them the authority to operate quickly. We'll be experimenting this summer with live fire on this.
Okay. This is more of a request, sir. I think this kind of understanding of hypersonics and the importance of it is lost in translation inside this place. There's a few of us really paying attention to it, but as you as the subject matter expert, or the one that's on top of this, and everyone else engage with the members kind of in a deeper dive of why we should be focusing on this, if you would please, sir.
If your weapon travels at Mach 1, and you're actioning a moving target, or you're actioning a target that is fleeting, and that target is Mach 1, that sounds fast. Let's say that you're shooting that weapon at 1,200 miles. If you're moving at Mach 1, over the 2 hours, things on the battlefield there could change in the 2 hours that it takes a Mach 1 weapon to close 1,200 miles. If your weapon is traveling at Mach 10, then that 2 hours is compressed to 12 minutes. And that's the difference. It's the ability to see, understand, decide, act, and hit your enemy before your enemy can hit you.
I'm gonna borrow that one from you if you don't mind.
You've spent a life.
Claim that one as my own if you're okay with that.
You've spent a life shooting, moving, communicating. The faster you're moving, the faster you're shooting, and the faster your round hits home, the better. And speed is the advantage of the 21st century. Speed in compute, speed in decision making, speed of engagement.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Chairman yields back. Chair, I recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Ryan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here. Agree with both what you said, Admiral Paparo, that your AOR is, quote, the defining strategic theater
What you said, Mr. No, in referencing the NDS, that we have to deter China through strength, and that you said we're doing everything we can. My concern, building on comments from colleagues, is that what's happening in the CENTCOM AOR is a direct undercutting of that ability to show our strength and then, in effect, deliver the deterrence we all agree that we need. In the first 4 weeks of, primarily in the first 4 weeks of the war, we expended tremendous numbers of long-range missiles, 1,000 plus JASSMs, which is 20% of our stockpile, 850 plus Tomahawks, more than 30% of our stockpile. As many in the room know, we produce 80 Tomahawks a year. That's 10 years worth of at our current rate of production stockpile used in 4 weeks. We know for air defense munitions, half of both our THAAD and Patriot interceptors expended in that time period. As you've briefed, Admiral, these are critical munitions on day one of potential contingencies in your AOR, and they were low even before the Operation Epic Fury. In 2025, in fact, the administration said it couldn't provide Ukraine with Tomahawks because they were needed rightly in Indo-PACOM. And then in 2024, Admiral, you talked about, at that moment, your dissatisfaction with magazine depth, which, to the chair's credit, everybody in this room, we've been working to address. And I'm not dismissing that, but the reality of where we are now is important. That builds on the fact that beyond the munitions, Iranian missile and drone strikes have hit U.S. bases across the Middle East and shown a lot of capability that we knew was coming, but even more threat from that. And then, of course, as other colleagues have mentioned, the readiness impacts of using over 40% of our deployed Navy ships in the war after them just coming from the Western Hemisphere for Venezuela. So I, along with many others, are worried about, one, the position it puts us in, and you ultimately and your folks in Indo-PACOM. Two, what message it sends to China, as other colleagues have said, and ultimately what it means for our ability to deter and, if necessary, defeat action. So, Assistant Secretary No, looking at all this, munitions burn rate, readiness strain, base vulnerability, how can you say, as you just said, we're doing everything we can in the Department of War to deter?
Congressman, as Secretary Hegseth has said, the department has sufficient munitions to address any task at hand, including those that may arise in the Indo-PACOM AOR. So we will continue to work closely with Admiral Paparo and the entire Indo-PACOM team to make sure we're postured.
And you can deliver that with a straight face, that there's been, you really honestly believe that. I would point folks to independent public source, open source research from CSIS, other leading think tanks, nonpartisan, highly trusted. These impacts are real. And if we don't acknowledge that and be honest about it, how can we say we're doing right by our folks? Admiral Paparo, I know this is uncomfortable. I get it, and I want to hear in the classified setting, but I think the American people deserve to understand that decisions that are made, by the way, with no input from Congress, have real immediate operational impacts.
Congressman, I'd say the way ahead is tripling, quadrupling the production rate of these munitions. And then number two, finding suitable, innovative, non-traditional substitutes for them, which in some cases, with the right innovation, can exceed that capability. That's the way forward.
And we are all working on that in good faith, but that doesn't take away from the immediate impacts. And the timelines that you've briefed to us and that others have put out there, that we're quickly coming upon that, and we just mathematically are concerned about that. And to be clear, I am rooting for us, and we are all rooting for us, but solving this problem starts with an honest reckoning. General, do you want to add anything on that?
What I would add, Congressman, would be simply this, that you know the state of our stores prior to any of this happening. You understand the PDs that have been given to us to support operations globally before this, and that we've really got to get to the beginning of this, which is what do we need, how is industry helping us get there, and then look for some of these other creative avenues to pursue to solve some of our problems. Admiral Paparo has talked at length, ad nauseum almost, about some of these cheaper alternatives that we have. We need to run full force at some of those things and solve our own problems, as opposed to going back to getting old dodix, old forms of engagement, and really start to work to solve our problems, sir.
Agree. Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right, we are now, we were going to end at that, but we're going to go to Mr. Kuda for questions, and then after that, we will adjourn the public hearing. We'll go to the classified hearings, and we will start back on the itinerary of members as if we stayed in public session. So those members who are up next, starting with Mr. Fallon, will be recognized in the classified session before we go back to members who have already had a chance to ask questions. So those staff members back in their offices, if you're waiting for your member to get the questions, make sure they understand that they're going to be first up when we get in a classified session. With that, the gentlelady from Hawaii, Mr. Kuda, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Admiral Paparo, as you know, this morning's headlines in the Advertiser read, Pacific Chief hopes for consensus on Hawaii land leases. A very general question. Do you think that we can reach any kind of consensus with the threat of condemnation hanging on in the air?
Aloha, Congresswoman.
Aloha.
I am confident that we together can find a solution. I think all parties understand the critical status of Pohakaloa training area, as well as all the other training lands and important land issues. And I am confident that we can find a solution that's acceptable
I know
to all.
you're confident, and I know you're committed, but I also know you're not the key one negotiating right now. So my basic question is, can there be any kind of consensus reached if condemnation continues to be the threat? In my humble opinion, this is coercion. This is not consensus that we're talking about. A simple yes or no. Shouldn't condemnation be taken off the table in order for us to have a real solid negotiation as to these lease lands?
I think finding a consensus solution is important, and it's above my pay grade. These terms.
Understand. I know, but I think you'll agree from your
our
past.
relationships within Hawaii are really critical for the operation of the joint force, and it's our home.
Absolutely. I think the only person who's come before me right here to be able to talk about Pohakaloa, you're the only one who actually lives in Hawaii. So you know exactly what's at stakes. You know exactly what we mean. The lands in question, though, let's take it a slightly different direction that hopefully you can help me with. The lands in question are former Crown lands, public trust lands that the Admissions Act dedicated to the benefit of Native Hawaiians. These are ceded lands. They're held in trust. Knowing this, who needs to be at that negotiation table in order for us to seek this consensus, this positive resolution that you'd like to see?
Understood. Members of the community and my own dedication to the Native Hawaiian community. And so all parties with a stake should be a part of the process.
Do you think
Must
Native
be.
Hawaiians have been at the table? Do you think their voices, their perspectives, their historical trauma, has that been at the table? Has that been part of the negotiations?
I know that U.S. Army Pacific is very respectful of those traditions.
Very respectful. Have they been at the table? Who's party to negotiations? Have Native Hawaiians their voice? Entities, including but not limited to the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, that has a constitutional responsibility to these lands and to their beneficiaries? Have they been at the table? Should they be at the table?
I'm sorry, I'm not a party to the negotiation, as you well know.
But knowing what you know living in Hawaii, knowing the importance of making sure people are not just present, but they're engaged, their perspectives are actually heard and included, do you feel from everything you've seen so far, and most of that is just what we read in the newspaper, do you feel Native Hawaiian voices, their shared history, their connection to the Aina, do you think that that has been a part of anything we've seen so far in relation to the lease negotiations?
I think we can work harder at it.
Absolutely. I think we have to do a lot better.
Thank you.
Simpler question. PTA is stolen land. Can we agree on that? I mean, even if we take a look at the area in question for the leasehold, the vast majority of the land being bombed right now was taken as a result of the illegal overthrow and the Admissions Act. Can we agree that we are talking about right now stolen land? Yes or no?
Are you asking me? I'm not going to answer that.
Okay.
That's beyond my remit.
So do you think we paid anything for over 2/3 of the land that you're bombing right now at PTA? How much do we pay for that? Nothing. And for the small portion that we are engaging with now, that I want to remove the threat of condemnation for, that I would like to see in a real robust renegotiation with real advocates, real beneficiaries sitting at the table, their rights, their perspectives, their views, their history shared and part of an agreement. Do you not think that they should be at the table, given that vast majority of PTA, Pohakaloa Training Area, is stolen land? The rest of it, you paid $1 over the last 65 years. Should they not be at the table?
I think it's important that we reach a consensus approach, Congresswoman.
Can
and
we
you
at least
know I
agree
do.
that Native Hawaiians were never there and never asked in the first place whether or not they felt okay giving their crown lands to the federal government, to the United States, to be bombed by the military? Can we agree that Native Hawaiians never gave their consent? They never gave up their authority, their sovereignty, their claims to these lands?
Gentlelady's time's expired. I appreciate Mr.
Thank
Fallon
you, Mr.
accommodating that audible call. This concludes the open portion of our hearing. We are going to adjourn now to reconvene at 1:10 in room 2212.